I'll let the members introduce themselves here, and then we will jump into an agenda that is primarily, this is as it turns out, the first of what will be 2 or possibly 3 meetings to just review how the grant process went this year and firm up our recommendations to the council for what the process will be next year. So with that, Councilman?
Good morning. Tony Emerson representing District 4.
Christina Valdivia Alcala representing District 2.
And I'm Karen Hiller representing District 1. All right. We have before us an agenda that includes starting with just approving our minutes from September. So I would entertain a motion to do that.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any corrections, additions? With that, all in favor say aye.
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 All right, minutes are approved. We will move right into reviewing last year's process and looking forward to this year's process. And photo finish here, we've got sorry. 2 key people from United Way joining us. Why don't you 2 introduce yourselves?
I'm Jessica Len here with United Way of Greater Topeka.
Brett Martin, United Way of Greater Topeka.
And is there anybody online that's going to be part of this conversation with you?
Perhaps Juliet.
Yeah, Juliet and Joyce.
Hello, I'm Juliet McDiffit with United Way.
Okay.
And Joyce Kotzer with United Way.
All right. Thank you all for being here. What we typically do is to start by just going through the timeline, the priorities, and the scoring and rating sheets. If it looks like everybody wants to do things just the same, it's a pretty fast process. If there are comments or suggestions, then we'll do whatever sort of deep dive we need into that. There have been conversations along the way in the process this past year, and so I do expect, at least on some points, I've done the best I can to have a little crib sheet in hand of what those points were so we don't forget, but we're really open. What we'll do is discussion amongst the committee members and United Way. We really appreciate having United Way as a vendor to help us do this process, and both their feedback on our process per se and the expertise and experience that they bring to the table as well. We do have some agencies online. I don't know that we have any advanced comments that have been submitted or anything, but there'll be time for agency comments as well. Before we go on, though, let's go ahead and introduce the front row of staff here, because we have a new person that's from our city department managing or overseeing these contracts, and make sure everybody knows who's who.
Bill Cochran, Chief of Staff for the City Manager.
Rochelle Vega, Vertana Housing Services.
Carrie Higgins with the City of Topeka, and I will be Corey's backup, so I'm here to learn and take notes.
That's what we heard, so I want to make sure everybody knew who you were. Thank you. We also got Steve Wade.
I couldn't hear that at all.
Can you hear me now?
So pushing it mutes it.
Oh,
So it's on all the time unless you...
sorry. I'm Carrie Higgins with the City of Topeka, and I am Corey Wright's backup, so I'm here to learn and take notes.
Okay, so could you hear okay that time? All right. So now, don't push that button.
Push it. Yeah. Thank you.
Holding up the wall in the back, we've got Steve Wade from Finance and Bill Fyander from Planning, which is over our housing programs as well. So thank you, too, for being here as well. All right. Committee members, the way our agenda lines these up is just a process timeline, priorities, and then the scoring and rating. Does that order work for you? If so, let's just jump into the proposed timeline. Gretchen's going to get that up on the screen for us so we can see it.
That's the calendar you're wanting, correct?
Correct. And I'm not quite sure who did the work on this. Was it you all at United Way, or Carrie, was it you all at staff?
City staff, we worked on it together, but this final piece was put together by city staff
Okay,
based on what we've discussed.
okay. Could, whichever of you is appropriate, identify for us any changes that you made?
Yeah,
update this?
no real changes. We took the timeline from last year and adjusted the dates just slightly for the changes in calendar, but for the most part, I think everything on here reflects where we were previous.
Okay,
So-
thank you. My thought is, because sometimes these things become interrelated, that we kind of do a tentative approval or consensus and move on through each piece until we know we've got the package figured out. Any comments from council members then about the timeline as proposed?
None.
Okay. Councilman? No. All right. Well, just for those watching, what this does is, in general, has the review that we're doing right now in October and November, ideally getting the priorities, a process and budget recommendation to the council before the end of December. Stubbed in here for December 14th, but because we missed a meeting in October, we may not hit that. Training for the grant process, first thing of the year, RFP released by April 25th, workshop held on the 26th, applications due 30 days later, the end of May, to the city's department, but through our electronic system. With a process then happening in the summer, June 8th, for any proposals that don't meet standards, and then a process of reviewing by expert team occurs that United Way would engage our vendor. Again, that's a process that they picked up from what we did in the past at the city. Recommendations by July the 5th, appeals, if any, in mid-July. Final recommendation ready for the council by the 1st of August, which ties in with the city's budget process. Actually, this shows, now that I'm reading through it again, August 23rd, which is the old traditional state deadline for budgets. But at this point, Steve, what is our deadline? October?
We have to have submitted by October the 1st, but really we need a dollar number prior to that, before your approvals right after Labor Day.
Well, what happens is you get the dollar number approved in December, actually, so it's only if it changes, so there's plenty of time. So we may want to look at that. Again, the city budget adoption is kind of doesn't matter, but it's always good to have it stubbed in there. Tony?
Thank you, Chair. I guess one question up on the communication thing. It says 2023 request for proposal released by April 25th, and then the very next day there's a workshop. Is that a request for proposals for people wanting? That is correct.
Yes.
I guess my only question there is, do you want to allow more time between the release of that proposal and the application workshop? And my thought is, I know, at least in my world, when we get RFPs or requests for quotations, it's good to have time between that, so you can go through and ask, think of any questions and such.
Yes, I mean, to me, that would sounds appropriate, and it's up to Brett.
Yeah, we're doing this way because it's typically the way it's been done. But if we wanted to allow a week, we can certainly allow a week to be able to have folks take a look at that. So if we wanted to, the request for proposal, once the priorities are put together, once the timeline is put together, and once the scoring and rating, once all these things are approved, the RFP, that's really the bulk of the RFP. So once all of those things are decided upon, the RFP is pretty much, then we go in and make the changes, put the dates in, make any changes to scoring or rating, make any application wording changes, and then it's ready to go. So if we wanted to back that up to the 18th.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be my suggestion.
Okay.
That way, because there might be, stuff they find that's either wrong or something they weren't expecting, and gives them a few days at least to look through it ahead of the workshop.
Yeah. So we could do that. So we could still release on the 18th and then have the application workshop on Tuesday, the 26th. Yeah, I think
that'd be great.
Yeah, I think it works just fine.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because, for the most part, people that have been involved in this process are going to know in December what it's going to say.
Right.
Or January, because it's been adopted by the council and it's locked at that point, just to know. Yet we have had some feedback from new people, either in existing agencies or new agencies, that they were a little overwhelmed. The idea, just to throw this out, of doing the workshop immediately was to get everybody in the door, release it, get everybody in the door, get that briefing done, and to engage everyone in meeting whoever was coaching that application process so that they knew what it said and knew who to call with questions.
Right.
So
if we back it up a week, what that allows is potentially for new applicants or folks who may be new staff-wise or something like that to generate their questions. But what we've done is we've still not taken a week. I mean, we still give them a month.
You've held it April 26th.
Yeah, exactly. So April 26th through May 27th, it still gives a month, but it does give a week if we've got new staff members or new folks who need to take a look and generate some questions. I'd be perfectly fine with that, again, because the RFP is pretty much going to be decided. All of its details are going to be decided in December. So,
Okay.
Yeah, so we could certainly kick it back to the 18th. Folks generate those questions.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
That'd be my suggestions.
Okay.
any thought from the agency gallery on that?
That's right. Yeah.
Sounds great. We've got some online as well. Any thoughts from any agencies that are online? Okay, there'll be time before we finish. But all right, so we may change to the release date to the 18th and just stub in that the city council adopts the budget by October 1, just to update a little bit. Okay. Well, with that, let's set this one aside and go right into the funding priorities.
Do you want that pulled up?
Please. Once again, staff and United Way, any changes to this at all?
No changes on our end or suggestions from United Way. So,
Okay. Then I will throw it out to the committee. We had made some changes to this last year, not to the priorities, but to how the grants would be done. So, this is also where we stub in the amount of money that we're recommending be provided. So I will open it up to the committee for any conversation or suggestions. Carrie and Rochelle, CDBG has ebbed and flowed over the years. This figure of money is a formula, if I recall correctly, out of CDBG. Are you expecting still that that's going to be the same amount, or that our grant will go up next year?
Council member, we are expecting it to be about 67,000, so about the same, but we won't know until first quarter next year for sure the amount.
Okay. So, and you all have been, Karen's opinion, cautious appropriately about not overestimating that. But I was thinking that some things through the new presidential administration were coming through to up CDBG money. Not so?
We haven't heard of that at this time, so we were just going with the 67,000, like what was allocated for 2022, and that's a tentative amount.
It may go up, but we were being cautious and sticking with that amount until we get more information.
Okay, so let's go back to what you were just discussing in terms of timeline. If it goes up, you would find out when?
When is,
It's usually second or third quarter of the following year, because we have to wait till Congress allocates the money to HUD, and then HUD has to give us our approved.
Can people online hear Rochelle? Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala, can you hear?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, just making sure. A little muffled with that mask, but thank you. Okay, so second or third quarter is when you would hear. Is there, it's been a while since it's gone up, so is there a routine? I mean, would the staff automatically alert the council or you, Carrie, if it was up and then alert us that they're, because the allocations would have been done by then?
yes, and to be clear, I know we're discussing 2023, but we don't even have an exact allocation for 2022 yet. It will be here, Katrina, our accountant, said about first quarter. So 67,000 is what we're guesstimating for 2022, and then 2023 is pretty far out for this pot of money, and so that's why we're saying we're still guesstimating that amount.
Just wanted to kind of refresh on that, and because so many things are changing, just to be sure. Okay. This amount, I think, has not gone up for 5 years anyway, maybe? Michelle?
No, it hasn't gone up really. It's gone down just a little bit, pretty much steady the last year or so.
Well, we've taken some agencies out in that process too. So, okay. Well, all right, let me take it by section. We've got the 6 priority areas that the council has targeted the funding at for the last number of years. We have always had applications in each of those categories. Well, I've been fairly satisfied that the money was put to good use. Any changes? And I'm not seeking them, just double checking. Okay. Any changes that anybody has in the, we went to minimum grant request of 10,000, maximum 25. This is where we have the 2 grandfathered agencies that comes up from time to time as to whether that grandfathering should continue. Any?
Chair?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Going over, and I don't have everything pulled up here, Positive Connections received how much this last grant cycle?
I don't think they got the whole 35 just on the math.
They received, it looks like 13,586. The request was for 35,000.
That's right. They were had the lowest score of any that were allocated funding.
Okay, so this is just an out there question I haven't thought fully through, but they only received 13,586, maximum amount 35 if they meet all criteria. So I think that's probably the first time that happened. Would that be right, Rochelle?
Pretty close. They've usually received most of them, what they've requested.
The only reason I'm asking that question, Chair, is that is such a huge difference. I don't know what that means for looking at this right now. Given your history, Chair, on this, I mean, that's a pretty marked difference that we're looking at. And I'm just wondering if we should keep it that way. I'm not saying it shouldn't. It's just a question.
Well, in both cases, these 2 organizations were basically, the committees in the past felt like their circumstances were such that they should get an opportunity to get substantially more money than anyone else. And so if you look at that, it's been a while now, whether this body would recommend the same at this juncture. I think that the combination was, and people can help me if I'm wrong, but the consideration was the importance of what they do, which arguably everyone's is really important or they wouldn't be there, but nonetheless, the importance of what they do, whether anyone else did it, what their sources of funding were, and what their level of service was, what difference it would make.
Yeah, I just saw that and I'm thinking, maybe that had something to do with this being the time of COVID and maybe a rebound back to, levels more along, funding levels more along this line. It just stuck out. That's the reason I'm
Absolutely.
asking. It's still trying to get educated on the process.
And I guess, Chair, on that, they're not guaranteed, well, obviously, they're not guaranteed to get that. They just have the opportunity to get more than the 25,000.
Correct.
They're just exempt from the cap, or at
Correct.
least from that cap. And otherwise, they still have to do everything else, and they only get what they score. So.
Yep. I will just throw out that, and this is very difficult, but given tightness of money and then the needs that we're addressing, I've been inclined actually for a while to drop that and have both of those agencies be on an equal footing with the others. It does allow more money into the grant pool without adding money to it. But I'll just put that on the table.
Chair, do you know, how much did Shawnee, and it's probably Shawnee County Medical Society,
They got,
how much did they get last year?
47,000.
47.5? Okay. So for them, it did matter. I mean,
it did. And some of that, the judgment gets into, and United, one of the things back and forth with systems that United Way is able to do that we haven't done much is to look at what other sources of funding they have and potential sources of funding they have, and you do that comparing it to the other agencies as well for the services that they're providing.
So in our experience, the conditions that led to the 50 and 35 in terms of provision of services and potential revenue streams have not changed for these two organizations. So they receive United Way dollars as well. And in the application that we get from them, we have seen that they do have limited revenue streams and that they are, in their applications, still unique in service delivery. So in our estimation, those things haven't changed in our experience in terms of the conditions that led to them being exempt from the initial cap. So we see that in their application, still limited revenue streams and unique service delivery. So just something to consider.
Thank you.
so, Chair, if I may.
Please.
So Brett, I guess on that, you would recommend we leave them as is then, is that?
My recommendation would be that the conditions haven't changed for what they, again, I'm a neutral vendor, so I can simply bring my experience to bear and say that hasn't changed for them. So I don't know that I'm comfortable as a vendor making a recommendation on two agencies and their potential funding level, but I can say that the conditions haven't changed that got us here in the first place. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you
or
for
if that further muddies the water, but.
Well, that's something that you bring to the table is the facts and that breadth of vision, so. We don't have to decide it right now. This is our first run through this sheet, but these are the issues that we have faced before. Moving on down, and we chose last year to shift to making it clear that we were not funding new untested programs and that agencies needed to be able to demonstrate at least 2 years' experience prior to the date of application. So already in the third year of that program, so that there was some history and so on. Just wanting to bring that forward if there's any reconsideration of that. That seemed to work pretty well, actually.
Chair,
Yes.
I can just say right off the bat, I think that that was a good move that we made, and I'm going to say I don't see any need for any change. I know we're in an initial dialogue, but I like the way that that is set up.
Okay, and there might have been a little bit of a stumbling of people understanding what was year 2 and what was year 3, but we've kind of worked that out administratively, right? So we're all on the same page, okay? Then, again, we're back down to the bottom with dollars. Looks like the CDBG number should stay. We can get back to this, but that's where we recommend to the city council and then to city manager and so on, what we think ought to be come out of the city budget for that. We've heard a variety of feedback from the council members, everything from we should get out of this business to we need to do more. So that's and get out of this business by just hand it off and get out of this business by leaving the money the same. But so we had a pretty good run last year and learned, made some changes and did well through that. Okay. This sheet also identifies that we would use a scoring system and use that to do the final allocations. Any preliminary thoughts on that? Whether we should change that? We'll get into scoring specifics here in a minute, but. Okay, well, let's, and also, let's see. That means that we cut off the funding based on the scores and the ranking as well, as we did last year and have done before. Okay, we can come back to it, but let's go ahead and move on to the scoring. I think that we've got had some discussion about these various things last year. We've got some comments from United Way. I think these are yours. Rather than put your comments up on the screen, if we just want to go through the scoring sheet and then have any conversation. The bullets that I have, let's see, is ask Liz to check our minutes from before, and then I had my own crib sheet for a while. Looking at whether there are some changes we should do in scoring, issues about budget sources, optimizing the inputs that they have in terms of money coming in and so on. Duplication is something that applicants already answer, but perhaps collaboration is an additional item that we want to look at a little further. Unnecessary expenses, root cause issues, such as what is the need, what are the outcomes that we're working on, how do we measure that? So it's the notes that I had coming in. You want to just go through the scoring sheet in order? Thanks, Gretchen's got it up for us. Project has demonstrated need. And United Way, you may need to help me because I'm reading this printout, but all the different colors in the notes, I'm not sure I'm really smart at figuring out where there's comments.
So we, Chair, our suggested edits related to this have to do with coordinating the score sheet with the application. So
Okay.
that's what you have in the second piece, is you have this pulled directly out of EC Impact, and then you have the blue and the red type. And what we have suggested here is, based on our feedback from our reviewers, is that the reviewers have the score sheet, and then they have a reference to where on the application they need to be reading in order to be able to make that determination. In other words, we indexed the score sheet with the application. So, for example, on the score sheet for the needs section, we have added here that we would prefer to have this indexed with program narratives question 1, which is where that information rests.
Gotcha.
What we hear from the reviewers is that it's difficult when you read an entire application and then you go to the score sheet and you don't know where you need to be looking, because you can theoretically find this information in a couple of different places. And so we went through the application based on the conversations that we've had here and said, okay, the need score is based on program narratives question 1, for example. And so that, in terms of the suggestions, are what we have here. And then we have some slight suggested wording changes under capacity. And so those are the 2 areas where we have suggestions or comments.
Appreciate that. A question off the top then would be, in your explanation, you said we want to direct them first and foremost to the question on the application where they should be able to find that answer.
Correct.
Would putting that note on there, is that going to be a published note or an internal one for the use of the reviewers?
It would be public in that we would have in the RFP. So when you answer this question, these are the criteria.
Okay.
And how you're going to be scored on that. We could line that up in the RFP as well. But then for the reviewers, when they were in the application and they were on the score sheet, they would be able to hover over an area and it would direct them to that area in the application. So they would say, okay, I've read through the application, I've taken some notes, now I have the needs section. The needs section is now program narratives question 1. So I hovered over it, went to there, looked at that section again, and then I scored it. So it would be public to the applicants, and then it would be a tool that would be made available for the reviewers. So, because I think it's important for the applicants to know, when I'm answering this question, this is how I'm going to be scored on it. I think that's good for anybody to have a rubric in that way. So it would actually help, I think, applicants, but also potentially or certainly help the reviewers as well.
As long as it wouldn't limit the reviewers' knowledge of the community or other answers in the application from being considered.
Sure.
That was
Sure.
where I was going with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that it would limit them, but it would be a tool that would help them, and it's something that they've asked for. It's something that they've suggested, so that we also have some consistency and continuity through reviews. So
Okay.
They certainly do have discussion when they get together, and we facilitate that process, but they would have an area that they would be directed to be able to make that decision. So it certainly I don't think would limit them, but would provide them the direction that they've requested in
Okay.
order to be able to score more consistently and more effectively.
Well, and when we did that outcomes model training session in September and identified that it's not just the outcomes, but the need statement, that helps to tie that
It
together
does.
as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
it does very much.
Okay, any questions or comments about that tagging, if you will, of direction on where to look for answers? Okay, well, thank you for that. So then there's just going to be one place where you were making a suggestion for changes, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so why don't we just go through it then in order, and when we get there,
Great.
We'll draw you in. So demonstrating the need, you all felt that with the targeting was the questions are okay and the scoring is okay. Any questions or comments? Christina, I can't see you, so you'll need to holler.
Well, Chair, this is what I need to say. I'm still officially haven't been going out and about much to get the updated hard copies. And what I'm looking at is the email that Liz sent with the updated information. And am I supposed to be seeing blue and red changes, or is that just your privy to, or is, I'm just looking at a social service scoring sheet,
Yeah,
and that was the most updated one Liz sent to me, 3 pages long.
I think it's further back in the packet. It's behind that one.
What you're looking at is the one that United Way sent us that Brett just described, where they used red type to suggest adding some directional guidance both to the applicants and the scorers as to what section of the application that scoring would be done against.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying too, Tony. It's back in the packet, so just keep on with the dialogue, and
Okay, well,
gonna move here.
it's a little more cluttered to read the one that they sent in than just the form, but it's the same. How's that?
Okay, then I'll just stick with what I'm looking at then.
Yeah, where it says preview mode is where it shows the scoring that would be on that cleaner score sheet.
Got it.
Okay. Issues and outcomes then. Outcomes are clear. Outputs are clear. Were you wanting to reverse those or anything? There was some confusion there as well, or? The order is fine, you think? All right. Plan has been identified to measure outputs and outcomes. No change recommended by United Way. We get down to duplication of services. There was some comment about that in our discussions. Can anybody refresh on what that was? I mean, must have come in some questions about scores.
We had some discussion, Chair, related to in the logic model training, talking about how as programs begin to apply a logic model format to their program, they may in fact recognize that they are doing things that other programs are doing, and duplication may emerge in that process. But in terms of the score sheet here, and in terms of the wording at this point, we feel comfortable with what's here in order to be able to adequately address whether or not there's duplication of services or not.
So that's somewhat the attention of the applicants in the wording of the grant, and making sure that they identify if there's any duplication or not, and if so, why, and why it's good,
Right.
arguably.
Sure.
You need 25 child care centers, not just one, or
Right.
whatever the conversation. Okay,
Agreed.
just making sure, because I have
Yes.
duplication punched in on the questions list.
Yes.
Anything about duplication that any of the agencies recall or want to raise? Okay, and again, agencies that are online, you have to holler too, because I can only see 2 people. All right, let's keep moving. Achieving outputs and outcomes on prior grants, meaningful measures. This had to do with checking references. So you did have some comments on that, did you not?
We did, yeah. That
All right.
required another step for us in being able to verify those for applicants that had been in business for 2 or more years, where we did not have a history within our own system. So we were able to verify those. Again, that took a little longer for us this year, and that will all depend on whether or not we have applicants that aren't in the system, and we certainly won't know that until they make application. So what we also did is we took a look at the score here, and we did have some comments from our reviewers that suggested that this was weighted quite heavily, 20%. But We also recognize that with COVID, a number of programs did not meet those outcomes and goals simply because they weren't able to serve the number of people that they projected, because they projected recognizing a normal year and then simply weren't able to do that. Some of them had to adjust their services pretty significantly. So at this time, we don't have any recommendations here. It'd probably be something for an ongoing conversation, but no recommendations to change here. So
Okay, no recommendations to change, and therefore that would be an expectation that if they'd been funded recently by the city, that those reference checks, if you will, could be done with the city, but correspondingly with now that we've clarified that they have to have been around for 2 years, at least 2 complete years, so there are references to check in terms of how they've managed program and funding, that can work.
yes, I think we should also make clarification, though. You could have a program that's been in business for 2 years that still has no outcomes or outputs because no one's required it of them. So if a program has been in business for 2 years and we don't have any references to check because they haven't had a major grant or they haven't had a grantor, then they would get 0 points because we have nothing to go on. So I think that's important for us to recognize. And we actually did have that.
Yeah.
When we checked some references, we did have a program that was in business for 2 years, but they had no outcomes or goals that were verifiable, and so as a result, they received 0 points.
And with our determination that people would be managing with outcomes and with needs assessed, outcomes in mind, and so on, that makes some sense.
Yeah,
Really?
right.
Any further conversation on that one? That was hard, but if that's our standard, that makes sense.
Yeah.
If it's something that's not needed, not something that should be funded either, right?
Right.
One could argue, exactly. Or if you're just still kind of, it's a side program and you're kind of mooshing around trying to see whether it should shape up into a program. We're wanting that program to be established and measured before we would get involved with it, is how we had set that up.
Correct.
Okay, this is just our reprise chance to, get it right or say, yep, we got it.
Sure.
All right. Moving on then, formal process using client input. No issues there that I recall. Leadership strong, community-based representation. That often comes up. The council has stuck with it. The committee and the council have stuck with that expectation for somebody we would fund. Any discussion this year? We did adjust this a little bit last time, right?
Sure, which one are you on? I'm sorry.
We're on organizational leadership is strong and maintains community-based representation. And we did adjust how we measured that a little bit last year, if I recall correctly, just to clarify. Because there had been a little slippage and that affected scoring in terms of quorums and how many were expected to show up at meetings. Looks like we got that fixed?
Yep.
Okay. If there isn't conversation, we'll move on to past grant administration is effective. Once again, that's a reference check.
So what we have suggested there is that when this goes before the reviewers, that this score is pre-populated, because they will have no way to score that. So now that we have the time under our belt as United Way, that could be a score that we would put in there. We've relied on the city for that, but I think we have enough now. And
Okay.
if not, we can still work with the city on that.
Well, that's kind of how it worked when the city managed it, was that they just
Correct.
stuck that in as well.
Exactly, yes. So this will be a pre-populated field, so that once the reviewers get in there, this will be the only score that's already present.
You know, it was, let's just say, a little awkward in the transition, but in a way, well, but the idea was to make sure it wasn't just the city looking at the city stuff and inside relationships and stuff like that. That was
Sure.
really one of the core reasons it got popped out,
Sure.
I think. And so if it had to be a little bumpy for us to get it right and wrap our arms around it,
Sure.
that's probably okay, as long as we're there yet. So if that's the way to do it, then any comments on that from committee members? Okay. Moving on then, collaboration and partnerships. There apparently had been some questions about that, but 5 points, meaningful collaboration with 6 or more entities. 3 points for less than 6, and no points if there weren't any collaborations. There'd been some, I don't know, fussing about it, I guess, but I think overall people felt like, how could you possibly function without at least 6 collaborations? So again, any further discussion on that from city staff, United Way, committee members, or the agencies about a collaboration expectation? Okay.
So Chair,
Yes.
our recommendation comes in the first section of capacity, sorry about that, or the change of wording under capacity, where it says organization has the resources to produce the proposed outcomes efficiently and effectively.
Did I miss that?
No, I did, sorry about that. So that's the first section under capacity. So what you have is you have an additional document that says suggested edits to capacity section.
Okay, hang on a second, because I'm lost.
Okay.
I have an extra one. This is what he's talking about, the suggested edits.
Oh,
It's an extra one.
I guess that didn't,
Should be the last page of the United Way suggested edits, 2022.
I don't think those got,
Yeah, it's the very last page. Turn that over.
this is, hang on a second. Okay, that's mine from printed out at home, sorry. Probably good now, got it.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so capacity section, which is, going back to the score sheet, capacity, and when you're talking about it,
We're talking about the very first one.
the
that
very
says
first one, that's a
organization.
10-point, okay.
So what we have recommended is the question stays the same, but the description of the point awards changes. So currently for 10 points, it says there's a history of effective program management, cost-effective and quality service delivery and evaluation planning. Because there is not a budget question on the score sheet, and because this is the one that the reviewers for the last couple of years have used to review the budget,
Okay.
they suggested that the wording of the points 10, 5, and 0 reflect budget. So instead of that, there is a history of effective program management. The suggested edit here is program budget is clear, adequate, and reasonable to accomplish grant outcomes. Expenditures are cost-effective and clearly linked to grant activities, and organization shows strong evidence of financial stability and program sustainability.
Keep going, just so everybody can hear, because you've changed the others as well.
We have, so for 5, instead of limited evidence of agency effective program management, cost-effective and quality service delivery and/or evaluation planning, we suggest program budget is complete, but may be difficult to distinguish from organization budget. Expenditures are clearly linked to grant outcomes, grant activities and outcomes, but may not be adequate, reasonable, or cost-effective. Organization shows moderate evidence of financial stability and program sustainability. Then for 0 points, the current language reads program management, service delivery, and or evaluation planning are not, are weak. Excuse me, that should say weak or not apparent. What we suggest here is program budget is included in application, but seems incomplete or not reflective of actual costs, activities, or outcomes. Organization shows little evidence of financial stability or program sustainability. What this does is this allows for reviewers to take a careful look at the budget and to ensure that the financial resources requested are in fact linked to program activities, are distinguishable from the larger organizational budget, and that dollars are proposed to be used suggest cost effectiveness and strategic use, and that the organization overall demonstrates financial stability and program sustainability.
My reaction is, wow, I think that's really good. We have struggled with having a reference to the budget in there. The angle that I think of too, though, is if the organization could, if there are funds from other sources that are available so that they could be encouraged to, and United Way does this better in a less point-oriented structure, I think, that is there, if they could get money from someplace else so that we could target the money to agencies that really, for whom they don't have a steady stream, whether it's federal money or whatever it might be, is there, I mean, this talks about having enough, but what if it's pretty fat, let's say, for lack of a better term? Mm-hmm. And we think that they don't need it as much as maybe some other organization with a combination of the needs and outcomes that they're addressing and the dollars that they describe are available, but this gets a little bigger, so I'm just throwing this out, that are available in the community. They could raise money some other way, mm-hmm. or whatever, and release these tougher to get dollars.
Yeah.
Is there, that's not really built into this question.
It's not, and so that to me would be a separate question related to the diversity of revenue stream and the availability of additional revenue. So in this question, initially, the way the current wording is has to do with the capacity of the organization with its history to be able to carry out program. In place of that, we have suggested that the way in which they would demonstrate that they have the resources to produce those outcomes would be delineated in their budget. So we have suggested a way in which that the program reviewers can review that budget in a way to adequately score them on their resources to be able to produce those outcomes. If there were an additional nuance added to this related to diversity of revenue stream or availability of other revenue, in my mind, that would muddy this one. And my suggestion would be if you were to go that way, it would need to be an additional question, because I'm not sure that a reviewer would be able to score this in an effective way, looking at all that. It feels like there's, I don't know, I feel like there's too much in there. I don't know what your thoughts are, but.
Yeah, I think that I would see that potentially, though, tied into your project has a demonstrated need. And maybe you can make that question more clear and tied to the financial reasons as well.
Okay. I mean, this is great progress, and the issue is, as I ask that question, it's not necessarily something that the applicant could or would want to share.
Right.
Yeah, no problem.
I don't
And so it would require, maybe the need thing is there, is the best way. If there's something, or we notch up with this question this year and see how it goes. But I think you know what I'm saying. So is there a way to just, is it not a good question? I mean, it's wonderful if you're healthy nonprofit, right?
So in United Way land, I believe we have it codified, and Joyce and Juliet, I'm putting you on the spot for the RFP, but I believe we have within the RFP a very clear expectation that we are not the only revenue stream and that they're bringing other revenue to the table. I don't know how we score that because I don't have our score sheet in front of us. But I do know in the conversations when we go through our review panels, which look different than these reviews,
Right.
that oftentimes panelists have been trained to look for other revenue streams, and that it's a positive when another organization brings other money to the table, because what it suggests is that they're not solely reliant on United Way funding. I mean, every time we go through a panel, we do pluses and deltas, and that's always in the plus column. They leveraged other dollars. They have a 4-to-1 match. They have, or United Way is not the sole source of investment. So I know that's there. I believe it's worded in our RFP as well. So if you were to make a change like that and want that, we would probably want to go back and even look at language in the RFP and make sure that it's very clear to a program that they need to bring that, if that's an expectation.
And I'm not sure that's it, especially with our cap of $25,000.
Right.
Right.
I'm not sure we have any agencies that don't have multiple funding.
Right.
So it wouldn't be that.
Yeah, I don't know that. Yeah, I can't recall any applications that have come in the last 2 years where this is the sole source of investment by any stretch.
I don't
So
think so.
everybody's bringing a lot to the table.
No, it would just be, and maybe and there's a difference between the need for the program and the need for the money.
Right.
Financial need.
And maybe this is good enough. I just, that has come up before as well.
Sure.
Any thoughts about United Way's suggestion to substitute language for capacity? And
Chair,
yes,
I like it. Both the 10, 5, and 0 in the language, it's tight. It's very clear and succinct.
thank you.
As do I, Chair.
Excellent. Well, and I do as well. We haven't had that, and we've needed it, and this looks really, really good. Do you think? Let's see. This one is very, very much financially oriented, but it was phrased program management before, but with all the other questions on outputs and outcomes, partnerships and so on, is there a need for the term program management to be included anywhere? Is it kind of redundant with or is it needed? I guess that could have to do with like staff turnover, relationships in the community, being able to, again, and I think of all the years we've managed this, there's sometimes when you just have a lot of staff turnover and sometimes when you don't, or, we've tried to accommodate, sometimes people have been new at things and so on, but not sure that's been significant enough to make a difference.
Well, Chair, I might, something that troubles me on this is that, that last item is past grant administration is effective, right? Which seems to me to kind of be, to match more what those things are up there under that first one. Because it gets into, reporting and invoicing is on time and paperwork is accurate, and it's like, that's weighted as much as as, you know, as this thing up here, I mean, that thing's 10 points. I mean, it's more than if you have strong organizational leadership or if you have a formal process.
Good
To me,
point.
it just seems like so out of whack, like, I mean, what's the standard there? Well, you were 10 minutes late getting something in one time, so even though you have a great board and everything else, sorry. I mean, it just seems so out of whack. And I just wonder, the things that you have under that first item almost seem like they should go under past grant administration as effective. Because, you know, there's a history of effective program management, quality service directory, and evaluation planning. To me, those are effective administration questions, not did you get a bill to them, you know, at 12:05 versus 12 o'clock.
That's a really good point. That particular question has come up before, and it was really, really important to our staff when it was being done in-house. And that's how it ended up earning its 10-point rating. The question might be then, Councilman, I'll challenge you with it.
Sure.
If we're talking about effective program management, cost-effective and quality service delivery, and evaluation and planning, in other questions we have rated whether you've demonstrated the need, whether you've identified your outcomes, and whether you've and outputs, and whether you've identified meeting them. We have asked you about duplication of services, using client input in your process. Does that cover what we would want to be evaluating in terms of program management and being, and cost effective is now covered in the budget one, quality of service and evaluation and planning, have we really covered it with those other questions? No?
Well, I mean, is there any place else that says take a holistic look at the organization and are they effective? I mean, and if there is somewhere else, I'm all for not asking it again, but and maybe the fact that you have good outputs is, you know, evidence that you do have effective program management. I don't know. Maybe it is a duplication, but and again, I mean, you guys are the experts. Please, I mean, if
You're raising
you
a
know.
really good point, so this is what we're here for.
So, Chair, in taking a look at this, this is just first glance. We've asked the evaluation and planning question already. We've asked them, for example, in a plan has been identified to measure outputs and outcomes. That to me is an evaluation and planning piece.
And we've asked for client input as well.
And we've asked for client input. So, one thing you could do is you could, and again, this makes it, I mean, interestingly enough, in the entire rubric, this is the most wordy section, which makes it harder to score and makes it harder to meet that mark if you're an applicant. What could happen is on capacity, you could collapse the past grant administration is effective into another header that would talk about program management. And it could say there's a history of effective program management, cost-effective and quality service delivery, and reporting and invoicing is on time
I think that's where he was going with
and
it.
accurate.
Yes.
So you pull the evaluation and planning piece out because you've already asked about it. You've already asked about evaluation and planning in client input and in the plan to measure. You could collapse those two and have a new heading for past grant administration is effective to reflect program management. So past program management is effective, for example. And then have underneath that the history, cost effective, and quality service delivery and that the reporting is accurate and on time.
Yeah, it's just one piece of that then, instead of being a 10-point category in
Correct.
itself.
I would then go on to say that that would need to be scored internally. I don't know that I would want an external person, I don't know that they would be able to score that. So that would still, I believe, need to be internally scored by city staff United Way.
Or whoever the reference check was with.
Correct. If we pull them together. If we don't pull them together, then it still needs to be. But I don't know that because a program would not, or because a reviewer would not have access to reporting and invoicing, they wouldn't know about that last piece. I mean, that makes this more complicated.
If they haven't invoiced on time and or haven't invoiced, they're not going to be around, right?
Well, we have some that are around and haven't invoiced.
Yeah, and part of the
time.
driver
Rochelle
for
can
that
speak to that.
was the drain.
Right.
Just
We
drain
have
on
had
the
some
admin.
that, may lose points here, but not lose a lot of points anywhere else. And that could have to do with a staff change or a staff turnover, or it could have to do with any number of different things. But I know based on this score, if I were to go back and look at score sheets, that we have applicants who have dollars granted to them who may not have reported or invoiced on time or had the paperwork accurate. And again, that could have to do with change in staff. It could have to do with changed email addresses. It could have to do with folks simply overlooking it. And if it's 2 days late, it goes from a 10 to a 5, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, if it's not on time, it's not on time, even if it's not on time one time.
And how did that hurt the main thing, the outcomes in our that's what gets me. It's like, I always have heartburn on this because I'd rather have people serve than, well, you got this paperwork in on time. To me, it just, frankly, it doesn't matter at all.
Right.
I want the people served in the neighborhood, and I think that's what everyone wants to get to. And I will admit, I just always have a hard time with, I don't know as a city we hold ourselves to this standard. No one ever gets fired because something's a day late getting in, I don't think. Same way in my company. No one gets fired because they're an hour getting something done. But I seem like we hold the sword over their head, where we don't care how good a job you do, anything else, but by God, get the bill to us, 11:59. So to me, it's like eventually it's going to be, they have every, if I don't bill my customers don't care. They're fine me taking 5 or 6 years to send a bill to them,
Sure.
But there's a whole lot of angst when you finally do.
Yeah, yes. Oh, yeah. They'll be mad at me, but...
So, Jessica, how have we handled that? Internally, we do not have a score for this on our application. However, we have had programs in the past that have not reported and have been, then it goes to internal volunteers, and those internal volunteers, there's, for lack of a better term, probation, and they're required to report monthly instead of twice a year until we get caught up with them. And the term we've used is good standing. To be able to say they are in good standing, and it's not one late invoice. It's
chronic.
It's a chronic issue that then there is, but again, we have internal controls for that because we have volunteers who oversee these reports. This is different in that we don't have an internal volunteer body like United Way has, like the Community Impact Committee that oversees all of the money and meets monthly and that type of thing. So it is a little different, but I can say that we don't have a score for this piece. I will say for our staff with Juliet and Joyce on the screen, it makes it tough when you don't turn your stuff in.
It does.
It makes it hard because there's a cadence to the work. There's a cadence to the work for Rochelle as well, and for Carrie and for Corey. There's a cadence to it. So when you're trying to wrap things up within the week you have to do invoicing, and you've got 4 or 5 partners who haven't done that, what that does is that then pushes into the cadence of the next work. And when it becomes chronic, it becomes a significant issue. That said, if they don't invoice, they don't get money. So.
But it's a drain, because then their reports aren't complete, then
is a
they're
drain.
carrying stuff. And we're talking about, maybe the compromise on that, which it's good you brought it up. There have been issues in the past of where it was one time, 2 days late, and arguments about who answered whose voicemail, or did they get the email, or whatever. So perhaps there's a definition within this of what, it's sort of like having the 5% slack on perfection.
Right.
where it's not an absolute drop dead on just 1 day late or something like that, for that definition of, a 10-point performance. Because it often does reflect things just being chaotic
Sure.
management-wise,
Sure.
if the reports aren't right or they're not in on time. And it's really the one measure, in a way. It did make, I was thinking as you were talking, if we were going to add that, maybe we'd need to add another question. But if in fact that just should be rated by whoever has dealt with that organization before, either way, it makes sense.
Right. And I can say,
And
Chair,
then the agency's not having to self-report and you scurry around anyway.
I can say that in all interactions with the city that we've had, they keep meticulous records. So we did have this issue last year, and someone said, we got knocked down because you said that we didn't meet this, and we feel like we did. Rochelle was able to pull every phone call, email, everything, and assure that in fact it was an issue. So again, that's an additional bookkeeping piece on behalf of staff when people don't turn their stuff in on time. And we all know that in any organization.
Sure.
If you don't do it, somebody else has to do it. And that
Or you're just dragging.
it's just dragging and makes it more difficult. So I don't have a perfect solution. But
Yeah, I just hate, I guess I think of the situations where, some of these organizations we're funding are very small. And I never want someone to say, I'm not going to go out and do this and serve this person today because I got to get this report done. Right. And it's just like we lose sight of what we're doing. The paperwork becomes more important than the service we're providing.
Sure.
So if we're going to have it, to me, this is a 1 point or something.
Right.
Either they're perfect or they're not. It's 1 or 0, not 10
Right.
or 5 or 0. So that's just my thoughts. It's, serving the people is what this is all about, not about making things easy on us or staff or even you guys.
Sure.
So,
Absolutely.
as my uncle used to say, if it's easy, everybody'd be doing it.
No, the other people say, but it's all money.
Yeah.
You're paying for your staff to administer the grants, or you're putting the money out on the street.
Right. Right.
We haven't talked about it yet, but United Way is wondering is thinking it cost more than they thought
I saw
to
the
administer
email.
this grant
Yes.
last year, so we'll get to
Answer
that
that question is
conversation.
yes.
Just keep adding.
Perhaps you guys are
So
thinking
their
we just need to
meter's
have one
running, Tony.
category.
Just saying. Well, with this conversation, what is there maybe a 10 points, but a broader definition of management that would be checked with references on the it is important in that incentive to get the points, especially looking at our system where 1 point can make a difference, whether you get funded at all, or how much every point counts toward what percentage of your ask you could get funded. So in that way, it's a pretty good incentive to figure out how to make it a priority and get it done and done right. What's the thought about broadening this, leaving it the same, leaving it maybe 10 points or 10 points abroad, or 5 points either way? What do you think?
With the permission of the committee, I would suggest that we take this back and United Way have a meeting with city staff. I have an idea already about how we could do this in a way that,
Okay.
but I don't want to float it yet. And,
Okay.
and again, we have a limited history in the management piece here. So I would want to confer with Carrie and with Rochelle and with Corey. And I would say that we could bring this back. And I don't think it would further complicate it.
Well, it would particularly not further complicated if you came up with some great wording and we all liked it.
Right. So pressure's on, but I think we can do that. But I would, not with the cameras and mics on,
Okay, well, let's
And
plan to do that.
not
and
across
let's-
the table, so.
Let's plan to do that, and we'll be setting another meeting here before we leave, hopefully. It sounds like it could be pretty straightforward. I would suggest that if you decide it's only a 5-point question, if you would come up with a recommendation for reallocating the 5 points?
Yeah,
Okay,
I have that already.
all right. Well, in looking at my crib sheet and the one that Liz made for us, I think we've hit the discussion points that had come up along the way as we went through the year last year, which I appreciate on the part of everyone. Anything else on this score sheet then? Tony, please.
Thank you, Chair. First, just a probably easier question here. I notice on your thing here, it says like there's a limit of 1,000 characters, which is, what, about 200 words, and I don't know if spaces count. Again, just from having a guy that fills out, not for you guys, but for-profit jobs, fills out these things, sometimes that character limits hurts our ability to respond. Is that ever an issue on these?
Good question. Joyce, I know that we worked on these character limits prior to. Did we, or Juliet, did we get feedback from applicants suggesting that they didn't have enough space?
No, I didn't have anyone report that at all.
Okay.
Juliet?
No, I have not received email or anything about the wording,
Okay,
about how many
Okay.
characters.
okay. One of
Just
the
gotta tighten up
reasons,
a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
one of the reasons why we have a limit on character limits is for the reviewers, because they have lots of these, and knowing the tendency of some programs, United Way included, sometimes you can be verbose, and we could say in 1,000, we could say it in 2,000 words, or we could say it in 1,000 words, and we could still say it the same way. And for the sake of reviewers who are putting in over 40 hours in reviewing these on volunteer time, that's why we have the 1,000 character limit.
Okay.
If we did get feedback suggesting that, we certainly would bump that to 1,500 or something like that. But it sounds like we haven't had that yet. So,
Okay,
but it's
great.
something to keep in mind.
Okay,
Yeah,
great. Fantastic. That's not a problem. No need to fix it. My last thing, if I may, Chair, is we talked about this the last time a little bit, but I remember in my first year on this committee, we had a deal where a thing in my, and not that it was in my district, but it was people taking care of babies.
Uh-oh.
No, I'm good. It was just the outcomes we gave, we didn't give money. And we gave it to people doing golf. And it was just such a... So is there ever a sanity check, in this process at the end where, man, all the numbers, these people have billed on time, they've done great, they have a diverse board, but they're teaching somebody to play Frisbee and these other people are curing cancer. Is there ever a point that we kind of look at the holistic, or is there an opportunity to do that?
That's a great question. I can tell you this, and this is a multi-year heavy lift, which is why we did not recommend it this year. It's something we have talked about. Our current score sheet doesn't allow a reviewer to review that. There's nothing in here. And we did have that conversation with our reviewers in two ways. One was because a program can choose their own outcomes, there is no way to adequately review the quality of the outcome. This is what I mean by quality. Not clear and related to identified needs. That's what we're asking. But there is no way, to use just the words of one of our reviewers, there's no way for us to review whether or not this is a good outcome or not. They could have related it to the identified need that they put in their program need, which they all do if they get the 10 points or the 8 points. But there's no way to say whether or not that's actually a good outcome. So let me say that initially. The other conversation that's been had is that our reviewers do not know how much money these programs get when they leave. All they do is review and give scores. Then what we do after that is we take the score and we multiply it by the requested amount, and then we throw it all in a spreadsheet. I don't know what their response would be if they left a review knowing that they had if they had scored in such a way that allowed for one program that they might see as not necessarily a strong need in the community, and money didn't go to another one where there was a very clear need, but the grant wasn't written as well, or they didn't perform as well in the prior grant year. That's a larger question for the community that's related to what we're going to coalesce around to make sure that Topeka is a better place for people to live, work, and flourish. So we don't have a way to do that yet, and that's a big lift. It's not impossible. I've brought it up a few times, but we didn't have the resources, time, capacity for today's meeting to come forward and say, this is what we propose for that. But I get your point completely, because while there are certain things that individuals might be passionate about, there are probably also things that we come to the table and say, we want more of this because this makes Topeka better. We want more of this. And it's not that the other things aren't important. It's that if we're going to allocate $400,000, we want it going here. While we do have, I think, a good list of priorities here, there probably at some point needs to be a conversation about whether or not they need to be 6, whether or not they need to be fewer, whether or not they need to be more targeted and specific in their language, whether or not there need to be specific outcomes tied to each of these priorities, whether or not they need to be grouped together in ways that reviewers aren't making decisions about whether or not we care for babies and whether or not we care for seniors, because they're in different pots.
Sure.
So that's the world of this. Looks like a tangled pile of extension cords. But I think that's where we want to go. We weren't prepared yet to be able to do that. But to your point, I think it needs to be done.
We'll give you till next meeting.
We can come back in December.
A way to look at that is it does drive back, as Brett was saying, to what we've identified as the priorities that we want to fund. And as I'm listening to him and thinking out loud at this point, because of the scoring system, we have you identify the need, and it's got to be in one of these categories. And the problem is that people might think that a golf or frisbee program for at-risk youth is one of the most important things you can do so we don't have those babies, and so that life is better. And then you can argue back and forth about where that intervention that our nonprofit network is, which is more important in the big picture of things. Maybe they're the same. There's not a way, even if a way to build that in would be if they fit our categories to be able to rank the need statement, which is more important, and then, put a factor in there based on the description of the particular need and what they're planning to do, which we've never done. We've left it strictly that whoever would approach us. We've never done it post-application. But that's where the discretion about the particular program approach and whether there's other money come in, that the agencies themselves are not going to be able to tell us. And we've set this up, with the exception of the grant performance and management performance, that everything is based on them, their self-knowledge, their self-understanding of the need and how they're planning to address it, and can show us that what their approach in how they're going to do it and what happens out of it is of value and is achieving that outcome to address that need. And so that's what we did build in, and we built in the sectors that we would address, and the sectors were chosen in part by where there's regular money available otherwise for things. And so we're not offering to do everything in town. We also are not offering to do brand new programs, but instead go get that startup money from someplace else or with your volunteers and get this thing shaped up before you ask us to fund it. We want to help sustain important things that are already proven. That means other entities have already funded it as well or made substantial contributions to it before we plug in, so that we're sustaining the things that are proven and important. One could say stuff could slip through, but that might be where is there other money, even though it's a priority area for us, or is it not as important within what we've even gotten, and a strategy for how to do that post-application in a way that's fair. I know that at this point it's been about 10 years ago when the council took over directly managing this process, and the thought there, one particular person from the council on the committee was, no, it's got to be points, that way it's as fair as it can be, and that doesn't mean it's perfect, but that way we're being as consistent as we can be and fair to those who have applied. And so just for a little history of how we got here.
I think any time we're doing this work, we're standing between different groups of stakeholders. Right? So in this case, for United Way, it's donors. Here it's taxpayers in one group. In another group, we're standing between the citizens of Topeka and what they see as important. We're also standing between established programs in the community who are doing great work. We're also standing between research and best practices that tell us if we want to improve things, this is how you do it. We also stand between, because we've got HUD dollars in here, we stand between the federal government and what they are looking at. We also stand between civic and religious groups and other organizations that have priorities as well. And we stand between other funders and foundations who are doing all that work. We stand in the middle here and we try to figure out how it is that we can best invest dollars given all of that complex group of stakeholders in order to be able to look at each of those group of stakeholders and say, we're investing wisely. We're investing wisely. We're investing wisely, strategically, effectively, those types of things. And I think the next level is for us to really take a look at the community itself and asset map and run some gap analysis. And to be able to say, what are those priorities, and pull together where those priorities are in other areas and align them with ours and see where they match, and then look at available dollars, and then look at the research, and then look at the community. I think there's a lot of different voices to be able to hear in this piece, but I definitely hear what you're saying in terms of that initial question, because our reviewers brought up something very similar. And so I don't think there's an easy way to get there, but I think there's a way to get there.
Great, thank you.
You know, last year we were talking about the whole outcomes issue and decided that there should, and we built into the calendar, 2 years ago we had a special meeting on senior services. Last year we had a special meeting on outcomes. Is it timely then, Brett, from what you're saying, that maybe we would stub in here that, not that it would be our meeting necessarily, but that we could be looking forward to a community-wide meeting on gap analysis that would help that would happen before October, like we did on those other two, that would help advise next year's committee to be able to go back and relook at the categories that we've prioritized and how, whether we should adjust that. Is that pending anyway?
My boss is to my left, and I have a strategic plan, and I have a board member here. I have a strategic plan that is due for board approval in July of 2022. So I have a lot of work to undertake between now and next October. I think it's something we need to have on the radar. There are conversations. Jessica and I were just in a meeting before this where we were talking to some key folks about doing some of this. I don't know that I'd want to be on the hook for it, given everything else and my penchant to overcommit, but it does need to happen. And I don't know who needs to convene it, but somebody needs to, because we have a lot of funds, we have a lot of great work, we have a lot of needs, and we have a lot of citizen voices that probably need to come to the table. I just don't know that I want to put us on the hook to say we'll be able to do that before October.
That would be an accurate statement.
Well, but wouldn't you, just throwing the ball back in on your end of the table, wouldn't you kind of have to do that if what you're doing is evaluating your entity's role in the big picture? And whether you're in the right, just like we're having this conversation for us, whether what you're doing is targeted correctly, volume-wise, weight-wise, whatever it is, you'd be evaluating us and everybody else?
I think it'd be reasonable to say we can definitely share the data that we collect through. We have some community stakeholder meetings scheduled for January, late January, and we're pulling together a lot of folks, and then and asking a series of questions, and then coding that data and analyzing it over a couple of month period and getting feedback. I think we could share that for sure, because it would be data that would inform not only our work but the work of the city as well.
I would think.
Be happy to, and a lot of the same folks that we'd be talking to would be part of that larger community convening. So, if we can get them in the room in January.
Chair, I apologize that I hate to throw a hand grenade and then run, but I have a job that I have to be at this afternoon, or I might be applying for one of these grants. So I need to go. I'm sorry.
Oh, so you didn't have some great wrap up?
No, I don't.
You're just leaving.
No,
all right.
just talk amongst yourself and have this fixed. Next couple weeks.
Get it all
Sorry,
figured
guys.
out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, sir. So yeah, I think we could share that data. I mean, and we'll be pulling that and analyzing it February, March, April.
Well, if we, it's helpful for us, the committee, I'm not sure who will be the committee next year, to calendar it just so it's on radar. And so I hate to put it in while they're mid-process. That's why we went August, September last year, to make sure that the votes were taken. Now that the budget doesn't get voted on until end of September, it squeezes that gap for the calendar that we've had. But the work could still start in if these allocations are going to be still our recommendation set by August 1, then in terms of calendaring for this group, that we should be looking for that any community assessment that's been done in the last 6 to 9 months.
Right.
Just to have that be the target study group kind of meeting, if you will.
Yeah, we can look at that for. Are you thinking fall?
Yeah.
For that, sure.
Yeah.
Our timeline will have us in full RFP development by that point, because we will have decided upon strategies and goals by July. So we could certainly bring that data.
Okay.
I think it'd be beneficial. We're going to be sharing it with lots of other partners.
Exactly. And so, again, just to, if it gets on radar for us, whether that helps time your community-wide meeting or whatever it is, make sure that this group plugs in on that we'd be ready.
Sure.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we've got some things stubbed in for our documents. Oh, we lost Tony, but hopefully the weather will be terrible and he won't have any jobs to run to by whenever we set this next meeting. We need to take a little time to go ahead and discuss what is brand new news to us that you all felt, if we can add that to the agenda and just talk about a little bit what your thoughts are. Apparently, the contract that we've had with you has been $21,000 a year, and you've made a proposal for a substantially higher amount. If we could just have you introduce that and discuss a little bit with us. I think we're going to be asked to advise on that as well.
Yeah, sure, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
We did, after almost 2 full years of working with the city through this contract, we have realized that we had significantly underbid the cost of what it was going to take to continue to carry out this contract. A couple of things happened that we just weren't aware of, and one of those was our grant management system. We've incurred an additional cost by putting all of the city's information into our programs, like additional agencies, that we put us over another limit, so we've incurred additional costs under that. In addition to that, having the city of Topeka fall under that contract. The first year, the grant management program, they allowed us to do that in kind. They gave the donation in kind to do that, but they are no longer willing to do that. So not only are we being billed for more agencies on that portal, but also for having another contracted agency come under us. And probably the biggest expense is the time. We had the scope of services, and I think that the city would agree that the scope of services has changed significantly since when we first started, and that was just not knowing exactly the path that this was going to go. It was the first time they've contracted this out, and us not knowing exactly what that would be like. So we have had, the biggest cost is just staffing. And we are at a point capacity-wise where we're needing to look at adding an additional part-time person to help manage the grant management portion of this. Initially, we didn't realize in the scope of service, we would come to 2 city social service grants committees, and we come to all of them, which we absolutely love and we would love to continue to do. But that was just another thing that we didn't anticipate, especially additionally checking of references of outcomes, a lot of those initial pieces that we didn't realize were going to be a part of this process. So that is why we did ask the city for additional funding to cover it's just to cover our expenses. And at this point, I am not even sure that with the new requests, it's going to fully cover our expenses. But it would put us in a position where we're better able to continue to provide this service and do so in a manner that is well done and efficient for everyone.
Correct.
I think what would probably help us at the time that this shift was made, and I'll say this in the context of, I think you guys have done a wonderful job for us. and as evidenced by just the meeting today, your engagement's really valuable. I do think that when the transition was made, it was argued that it was to relieve time on the city and expense on the city staff side, and also we were never privy to how that bid was built. If there was detail, we never saw it, and I'm not sure anybody wanted to at that time. But if your proposal is to double that, I think if by the next meeting, we could perhaps have whatever kind of construct you had on your first bid, and then whatever that, the detail that would help us understand how it has doubled in time and expense on your software, and correspondingly to have a report from the staff at the city as to, obviously both of you are still here, and Corey would have been here at the meeting too if she was available. So what savings we've had on the city side by contracting it out, so that we have a picture of how that's gone.
Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I just also think we need to inject a customer service component in this as well to have that part of the dialogue as, in future dialogues. Number one, just let me say, my understanding is that letter was received by the city or dated back in October, the very first week or whatever of October, and I just heard about this like a couple of days ago. So, yeah, there's that. But the other thing is that I think if we're going to have an all-around dialogue, we also have to look at what the United Way is providing in depth. This is not meant to, rag on or whatever any department here within the city, but I have been very, very impressed with the service that, the customer service that the United Way has provided. I don't know how all of this is going to end up panning out, whether, it's going to be a yay or a nay. But I also think that we have to look at that in the level of service that we are providing to the agencies that serve those that are requesting these funds. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Yes, I think there's an issue of cash money and staff time, both sides. The customer service to the agencies, as well as to us, if you want to call it that, and then the technical expertise. Not that we couldn't have called you up and asked you to come to the meeting anyway for nothing. You probably would have come. But anyway, that relationship has been of value for sure. But I'm quite sure that we're going to have to be the ones to defend that. That request has gone from what was a little less than 5% to 10% of the grants being made. So if we can put that on the agenda for our next meeting. And let's go ahead and try and set that meeting, and we'll wrap up today. I don't know if we're going to be able to get this to the council, certainly by the 14th of December. But if we can look at what is workable, we've got a little homework, but not much. What's a turnaround time that works for you all, United Way?
Well, next week's out.
Good.
I'm there, but perhaps. Well, we need to meet with the city because I'm assuming we'd also want to talk about the scoring sheet as well at that time.
Yes,
Okay.
both. But I'm feeling like giving you the appropriate amount of time to visit with city staff as well as do what you need to do, that it seems clear enough. I'm hopeful that we can bring it in for a landing and wrap it up with just a second meeting.
I believe, do we already have a meeting scheduled for December 10th at 10?
I think we do. Does that still work?
Works for me.
I have that on my calendar.
Yep. I do too.
Okay.
All right,
I think we could I think that would be plenty of time.
Okay. Well, let's just stick with that December 10 meeting then, and hear from each other as appropriate or if needed in between. If staff feels like you can connect up with what you needed and prepare what you need as well, we'll count on that. Before we totally wrap up, if anybody else has staff, agency guests, whoever, have any comments that you want to make, please, I think I can see you now. Anybody? All right. Well, with that then, thank you, everyone. Meeting's adjourned. We'll just tell Tony for sure when the next meeting is. All right. Good work. Good meeting. Thank you.